React Query, performant and powerful data synchronization for React. Let's click on the docs. It says React Query is often described as the missing data fetching library for React, and it makes fetching, caching, synchronizing, and updating server state in React applications a breeze. Well, today we'll find out if it's really a breeze as we build an example CRUD app. We'll also compare React Query versus Redux, Axios, and RTK Query along the way. Hello and welcome. I'm Dave. We'll be exploring React Query as we build an example CRUD application. I'll provide links to example source code and all resources in the description below. Let's start out with some of the versus questions. React Query versus Axios first. Really, you don't have to choose one or the other. React Query works well with Axios, so that's a bonus if you're already familiar with Axios and want to continue using it. Now I'm on the page in the docs for React Query that says, does React Query replace Redux, MobX, or other global state managers? Well, they highlight here that React Query is actually a server state library that's responsible for managing asynchronous operations between the server and client, where Redux and other global state managers are for client state. So that is a difference. However, Redux, modern Redux, now offers RTK Query, which fulfills the same role as React Query. So using one or the other there is more of a preference. Now, I have previously provided a tutorial introducing RTK Query, and today we'll build the same app with React Query, and you could view that other tutorial as well and compare and see which one you prefer. Looking at our starter code repository, I have created a React app with npx create React app. I've moved away or deleted most everything that we wouldn't normally use, so you see some of the extra dependencies gone. However, I did add in these font awesome dependencies because we'll be using a couple of font awesome icons today. And if you download this starter repository, of course, you can do npm install and it will install all of the dependencies that are already listed. We're going to add a couple more as well, so I'll do control backtick, type npm I for install, and then react-query. Also going to add Axios, so we can add both on one line and press enter, and we should see those added to our dependencies. I'll drag this down so we can see all of them. And yes, we now have Axios, and we also have React Query here listed in our dependencies. I'll close this. I should also say in the description I will link to a completed repository, so there will be two repositories, the starter repository and the completed one. Now, if we look over here in the file tree, everything looks fairly normal. I've removed some of the extra files that you get with Create React App. I also have a data folder. In this data folder is a db.json file, and this JSON file has a lot of to-dos in it. We've got to-dos and then an array with objects, and each object is a to-do. I got this JSON from the JSON placeholder website, but we're going to use JSON server locally to do a mock API here during development. And again, we're recreating the exact app that was created in my RTK Query introduction tutorial, because I'd like you to be able to compare apples to apples, so to speak, that we are creating the same app and you can see which one you like best as well. So with that said, that is our data. We're ready to start in the index.js file. Oh, I should highlight, I've also provided some CSS, and I did provide a little bit different CSS than I did in the RTK Query, just so the different application, actually the same application, would look a little different for you. Okay, now in the index.js, let's go ahead and complete some imports that we need right away. And the first is query client, and then we can hit tab, and we get that from React Query. We also need query client provider. And after we have both of those, we can import one other thing, and here we'll say it is React Query, if I could spell query correctly each time, Devtools. And notice tools has a lowercase t there, and this comes from react-query/devtools. And after that, our imports are complete. Now we are using React 18 and we are leaving React strict mode in. So underneath React strict mode now, let's add our query client provider. Press tab. Well, no, we didn't quite finish it. There we go. And now let's get the closing query client provider and put it after the app component. And then above, before we're in the JSX, we actually need to create a query client. And this is camel case, lowercase q, uppercase C. And we'll set that equal to new, and now query client with a capital Q and a capital C. So we've created a new query client there, and we're going to pass it into the query client provider with the value of client. So now we pass in the query client that we created, and that will be available to our entire application. Now we could just stop there, but let's go ahead and put in the React Query Devtools as well. So here we put React Query Devtools, and we say initial is open, and then we can just close that with the slash greater than symbol. Now, the React Query Devtools is different than React Devtools that's dedicated to React Query, and it will only open when we're in development mode. So you don't need to worry about having this here for production. This will only occur, or will only open up or be available to us when we're in development mode. So we'll leave that there, and of course we'll come back to that later when we launch the application. Now let's highlight the source directory and create a new directory inside named API, lowercase, and now inside that we'll create a new file, to-dos API, and it can start with the lowercase t and then camel case for the API with an uppercase. Now we'll do everything we plan on doing with Axios in this file. So we need to start out by importing Axios, and then we need to create our to-dos API and set that equal to axios.create. And now parentheses and curly braces, we set the properties. So we'll set base. Now this is important that URL is all uppercase or Axios will not recognize it. I have learned that the hard way. And now we'll say localhost 3500 because that's where we're going to run our JSON server instance. Okay, after that, let's go down and say export const get to-dos. And now this will be our read function in the CRUD acronym from create, read, update, and delete. And here we will request all of the to-dos. So we'll set a response equal to await the to-dos API that we just created and use the get method, and we'll get the to-dos endpoint. And then after that, we need to go ahead and return the response.data that we get from Axios. After that, let's create the create method, and that would be export const add to do. We'll set this equal to an async function that receives a to do. And now inside of this function, we can do this in one line. It will be return await, once again, the to-dos API dot post, and it will once again hit the to-dos endpoint, and then we pass in the to-do. Now after that, the next two methods are very similar. We have an update and delete. So I'm going to highlight this, press Shift, Alt, and the down arrow to create each one. Give a little space between. And the first thing I'm going to do is get the methods right. So we've got patch now for the update. If I need to highlight that and type over it. So to-dos API.patch. The last one will be to-dos API.delete. But then we need to make some other changes. Here, instead of add to do, this will be update to do. And here, instead of add to do, this will be delete to do. Now we do receive the to do for the update, but then we need to change the URL endpoint a little bit. So we'll change this into a template literal string, and it will go to to-dos, but after that we need to specify which to-do we're updating. So this will be to-do.id as part of the URL. So we're getting a specific to-do to update. This will also be similar here as well. So with the delete, we can once again turn this into a template literal, but after this, we're actually going to destructure what we receive here and just get the ID for the delete to do. And once we have the delete to do, we're going to go ahead and press slash again and then put the ID right here in the URL. And then of course we're not receiving the full to do. This will also be an ID. So let's save that. And then underneath here, we can go ahead and say export default, and have the to-dos API, just in case we would want to expand the application and for some reason we needed to export this. We won't be using it today, but it's a good habit to go ahead and have that available. Now we have completed our CRUD methods with Axios, and we have our instance up here as well. Let's go ahead and highlight the source directory once again, and let's create a new directory inside of it named features. And then inside the features directory, we can create another directory named to-dos. Now inside the to-dos directory, let's create a component named to-do list.js. Now I have React ES7 snippets installed, so I can type RAFCE, press tab, and I get the outline of a basic functional component. But we're going to add a lot to this today. So let's start with the imports at the top. We need to import use query, and this is going to come from React Query, but we also need use mutation, if I could spell mutation, and then we need use query client. That all comes from React Query. Then we need to import, and I put import all of the CRUD methods we created with Axios. So get to-dos, and then we also need add to-do, update to-do, and delete to-do. I'm going to press Alt-Z just to get the code to wrap if it ever gets to be too long on an individual line to see. Okay, after that, we're also going to use font awesome, so we'll have font awesome icon imported. And then we're going to use a couple of specific icons, FA trash for a trash can, and we're also going to use FA upload. So those are the two icons we need. Then we're going to import in use state, and that just comes from React itself. Okay, now that we're at the end of our imports, we're ready to start in on the component. The first thing we'll do in the component is define our state with a new to-do and set new to-do. And that's going to be equal to use state and an empty string. After that, we need a query client once again. Whoa, I put that on the wrong line. There we go. Now we need to define a query client once again. And our query client this time is going to be equal to use query client. And that is a hook, and that is delivering the query client that we were providing here in the index.js as we passed that query client in the provider. So now we're actually getting that here in a component from the hook use query client. Okay, after that, we need to say const. We're going to destructure, and I'm going to put these values on separate lines. So I'll scroll up for a little more room and say is loading, comma, is error, comma, error, and then data, and we're going to rename the data to do's. Now after we have that, we'll set all of this equal to use query, and we need to name the cache that is stored. And this cache is going to be named to-dos, and React Query provides that cache. After that, we need to pass in our method, so that is get to-dos, and we should be finished there. Okay, after this, we need to add the mutations that we created as well. This would be the add to-do, the update to-do, and the delete to-do. So the first one is add to-do mutation that we'll define. Let's set that equal to use mutation, and then we pass in the add to do method that we created, and then we put in curly braces and look for on success, and then on success has an anonymous function, and inside here I'm going to leave a note so we know what it does. It invalidates the cache, so it would invalidate the to-do cache when we add a new to-do, and then it triggers a refetch. So we get the to-do list again with the updated to-do in it. So it would have fresh data. And then we call query client dot invalidates queries to do exactly what we were just talking about. And we invalidate that to-do cache right here. Now the other mutations are going to look much like that. So I'm going to scroll up and then highlight the add to do mutation, shift alt and the down arrow twice to create two more, and I'll put space between each one. So now I can highlight add and press Control D to get the other instance of add and switch that to update. And this is the same. After that on success, we once again want it to invalidate the to-dos cache. So it re-requests the to-dos and we get the updated information. And then let's switch the add here and highlight that. And we'll switch this to delete to-do mutation. And it would be the same. We'll have it invalidate that to-dos cache and it will refetch. So we have the most up-to-date information. And now we have integrated the Axios methods, the CRUD methods we created, with React Query. So now let's go ahead and put one of the mutations to work by creating a handle submit function. And this will be triggered when we actually handle the submit of the input for the new form actually, where we input a new to-do item. So it's going to receive an event because it's the submit event from the form. And when that happens, you don't want the form to reload the page. So we immediately call event.preventDefault. Then we'll have add to-do mutation. And we call mutate. So it's add to-do mutation dot mutate, and then we pass in the to-do. Just for this example, I'm going to give the credit for all new to-dos added to user ID 1. After that, we'll take the title, and here we'll just pass in the new to-do. And then we'll have a completed property, and all new to-dos will be false. They still need to be finished. So after that, we have passed in the new to-do information, and then we just want to set the new to-do state back to an empty string. I'm going to scroll up once again, and right underneath our handle submit function, I'm going to define the new item section, and I'll just go over this with you. This is the form where a new item is submitted, and I'm storing it in the variable new item section that we will pass on to the JSX. So the form has the onSubmit handler, so it looks for the submit event and calls handle submit. We have a label for the text input, and the input is tied to the new to-do state. And when we get a change event, it sets the new to-do state. And then we have a button, which is a Font Awesome icon, and it's the upload icon. So when the form is submitted, it's triggered by this button, as well as just pressing enter, as any form could be submitted that way as well. That's our new item section. Now let's scroll back up to review quickly. Our query that gets information has an isLoading value, an isError value, and then if there is an error, we get the error, and as well as the data. So we can use these to conditionally render our content. So we'll scroll back down under the handle submit and under the new items section, and let's conditionally render our content here. So I'm going to have let content, and then on the next line we can say if isLoading is true, then we're going to set content equal to a paragraph that simply says loading. Now we can continue this with an else if isError is true. Then we could set our content once again equal to a paragraph, and inside this paragraph let's take the error.message that we get, and that would display whatever error message we possibly get. And then after that we could just have an else. So isLoading is not true and isError is not true, so we should have the content we expect here. And to start off with, we'll just set the content equal to JSON.stringify and pass in the data that we are getting back. Actually, the data is now named to-dos because we renamed it. So let's save that. And then for our JSX at the bottom, I'll remove what we have here for the div, and we'll start off with a main element, and then inside that main element we'll put an H1, say to-do list. After our heading here, then we'll put our new items section, so we have the form to add new to-do items. And finally, we'll put our content underneath. Now remember, currently it is just the to-dos inside of the JSON stringify, so it won't be that pretty, but it is what it is to start out with, and then we'll change it and improve it. So now Control backtick to open a terminal window. I don't think we started JSON server yet, so to do that, you could install it globally, which is what I have done. So if I were to install it globally again, I would put npm I JSON-server-g if you want to do that. You don't have to. You can just launch it with npx and then the commands that I'm going to type without npx. So I'm going to delete npx, but if you don't want to install it and just want to launch it, start with npx first and then type this, JSON-server-w for watch, and then we're looking at the data folder and then the db.json file, then -p for port and 3500. I'll press enter. It should find our to-dos. Yep, that's the resources, and it's available at localhost 3500. Now I'm going to open a second terminal window, and here I'm going to type npm start to launch our React app, pull Visual Studio Code over to the left of my screen, and we should see our app here shortly, and we'll see what we get. We don't have anything yet because I forgot to import the to-do list into the app component, app.js. So we'll just close the terminal quickly, and then we can fix this by saying import to-do list, and then we just want to return our to-do list below. So instead of the parentheses and the div within, we'll remove all of that and return to-do list, close it out and save. That should change what we see now. Yes, it did. So now we have everything here on the page we expected. Here is our new to-do entry, our header. Here is all of our stringified data. Also, I'd like to draw your attention, I'll pull this over, to the React Query Devtools that you can experiment with. They're right here in the bottom left. If we click on that, it opens it, and we can see the Devtools here. And it's still scrolling the page. But overall, says we have some stale to-dos at this point. We click to-dos and we got some more information. Now you could invalidate everything manually, refetch. You can look at the data. One thing I particularly like is the Query Explorer. Oh, I closed it and it just collapsed on me. There we go. Bring it back and you can see a lot of things about the query, including the state and the data that you have in here, the initial state. Definitely interesting things to look at. So there's other values, for example, besides the is loading, there's is fetching, is paused, things like that that you can explore and learn about. So go ahead and play around with the React Query Devtools as well. Okay, back to the application. It is working. It just doesn't look like we want the finished product to. So we'll grab Visual Studio Code, bring it back, and we have a little more work to do here in the to-do list. I'm going to scroll up as high as I can, and we're going to replace this JSON stringify content with more formatted content, and I'll just review this with you. So we've got the content, once again, setting it equal to todos.map now as we map over each to-do and create an article from each to-do. So we're giving each article a key, which is the to-do ID, and then inside of that, we've got a checkbox. And this is where we use the update to-do mutation. We once again say .mutate, and we spread in the existing to-do, and then we just choose the opposite of whatever the completed value is to overwrite the current completed value. So that is the checkbox, as whether it is completed or not. Then we also have a button at the end of the article for the to-do item, and this button is the trash can, which should delete the to-do, and we can see in the on-click we call delete to-do mutation, once again .mutate, and then we just pass in the ID of the to-do. And if you remember our CRUD method that was the delete method, all it needs is the ID, so that should be accurate. Let's save this and drag this back to the left and see if our application is working as expected, and I believe it is. What we do have, though, is one issue that I want to point out. Let's make sure everything else is working. So that unchecks and checks. Let's see if we can delete it. Yep, it's gone too. So that works. But when we add a new to-do, as I'm about to, and press enter, that should work. But we don't see it here. I think it's all the way at the bottom of the list. Yes, there is our new to-do. So really we want new to-dos to be at the top, and there's something we can do to change that. Another feature that we haven't talked about in React Query yet, and that is being able to add a selector. So now in our use query that is getting the data, after the get to-dos, we can put a comma, and then we can put in our curly braces and define our selector. So we'll say select, and this is our area to transform data also if we want to, and that's what we're going to do right now. So I'm going to take the data and sort it. So we'll pass our data into this function. We'll call data sort, And now we'll have A and B is in a typical sort function here. And I'll have B.id minus A.id. And this will sort the data in reverse order, or to-dos in reverse order. So we can save that. And now if we pull this back and look at the application again, now we see our new to-do at the top. And we can delete that and say, hey, and enter that, and now it's at the top. So this is the order we wanted. So now just a final word between React Query and RTK Query, which both solve the same problem. RTK Query does integrate with Redux, but in itself, it's not a global state manager. It's doing the same thing React Query does, and you can use it that way. What about when to use React Query? Well, it's kind of a preference for both, but what I have noticed is if you're used to Axios, such as the CRUD functions or methods, if you will, that we created here inside of our API with Axios, that might be an easier transition. RTK Query is more opinionated, a little more strict, and tied directly into Redux. Not every application needs Redux state management either. So there might be a middle ground here where for some smaller applications you might be more comfortable, unless you need Redux, you might be more comfortable with React Query. Myself, I really like RTK Query and I like using Redux, and they go together so well. That's probably what I'll continue to do unless I'm using or creating an application that I believe does not need Redux at all. And then I may use React Query because it's definitely an upgrade over just using Axios by itself. And it has many of the features that I'm used to from RTK Query, but we can just implement that with React Query. So it comes back to your preference. Overall, you get some of the same nice features though, and you get cache. So you don't have to create your own use Axios hook. You already get an is loading state, an is error state. You get the mutations, you can invalidate queries, and you can get more specific here too. We could look at individual to-dos if we were just updating one and wanted to look at a page, or just requesting one at a time instead of the full list. So there's much deeper dive available to React Query as well. And of course, you know, you can go deep with Redux and RTK Query. I like them both is the final verdict. And let me know what you like in the comments, especially after you check out both tutorials, the one for RTK Query and of course this one that has created the same to-do list. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection. And a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you. And thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.